You are paying rent on a room you have not opened in a year. You know roughly what is in there. A sofa from the old place, boxes from a move you made in 2019, your father's tools, a bike. The bike is important, or it was, and it is somewhere near the back behind the boxes you would have to move to reach it. The unit costs you around $160 a month now. It was $89 when you signed, and the storage company would like you to know that they are absolutely fine with all of this. They would prefer it, in fact. They have built a $50 billion industry on people exactly like you, and the single most valuable thing you can do for them is nothing at all. Because self-storage does not really sell space. It sells a decision you have not made yet, and it charges by the month until you make it. 2 things from you before we go any further, and both of them are easy. How long have you been paying for a unit? Not how long you meant to. How long you actually have. And second, honestly, could you name everything in it right now without getting up? I want both numbers because I suspect the gap between them is the entire business. And because somebody watching this is going to say 11 years and I need to see it. Put them below. And if you are already down there, a like and a subscribe genuinely helps this channel more than you would think. Right, the building itself. There are somewhere around 50,000 self-storage facilities in the United States. That is more than McDonald's, Starbucks, and Subway locations combined, and it is not close. Something like 1 American household in 10 is renting a unit right now. Look at what one of those buildings actually is. A concrete slab, corrugated walls, roll-up doors, no plumbing in the units, no heating in most of them, no windows anywhere, a gate with a keypad, and frequently, at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, not one member of staff on the property. The industry collects roughly $44 billion a year from that. And there is a detail about how it got there that does not sit comfortably. The American house has grown substantially over the last 50 years. The average new home is far larger than the one built in the 1970s, and the average family living in it is smaller. More space, fewer people to fill it. On any reasonable projection, demand for somewhere else to keep your belongings should have collapsed. It went the other way. The houses got bigger and the storage industry grew alongside them, which tells you that whatever is being stored was never really a space problem. So the obvious question is the one worth asking first. How does a shed with a padlock outperform a shopping center? Because most people assume the answer is simply rent, and that assumption is where the whole thing hides. The reasonable version goes like this. They built a cheap building, they divided it into 200 rooms, they rent the rooms, and the difference is the profit. That is a real business. But it is a boring one, and it would earn boring returns. Warehousing does that, parking does that. Neither of them produces the numbers this industry produces. Watch what happens when you compare it to the buildings it sits next to. An office tower has 1 tenant per floor and a 5-year lease. When that tenant leaves, the landlord has an empty floor for months and a leasing agent to pay. A shopping center has anchor tenants who negotiate hard, demand fit-outs, and can bankrupt you by walking. An apartment block has a superintendent, plumbing at 3 in the morning, and a legal process that takes months when somebody stops paying. Self-storage has 200 tenants, none of whom can materially hurt you by leaving, none of whom live there, and none of whom own the thing that guarantees the debt. You do. Now look at what it costs to run once it exists, because this is where the shape starts to change. Construction is cheap by commercial standards. It is a slab and a metal frame. There is no kitchen, no bathroom in the rentable area, no ventilation to speak of, no wiring beyond a light and a gate. Staffing is close to nothing. A modern facility often runs on 1 manager, sometimes part-time, sometimes shared across 3 sites, and increasingly on nobody at all. A keypad, a camera, and an app that will rent you a unit at midnight without a human being involved. In some cases, the manager lives on site in an apartment attached to the office, which is an arrangement worth its own conversation. Maintenance is a door that occasionally needs a spring. And then there is the thing that separates this from almost every other business you can name. There is no inventory. A shop buys stock and hopes it sells. A restaurant buys food that spoils. Even a car wash, which comes close to this, still has to buy water, chemicals, power, and brushes, and still has to physically do something to the car. A storage facility takes possession of nothing, insures nothing, buys nothing, and does nothing. The customer brings the goods, moves the goods, and carries the risk on the goods. Cheap building, empty rooms, no stock. Operating margins in the sector routinely run above 60%, which means the profit is not in the cost line at all, it is in the price line. And the price line is where it gets interesting. Think back to what you paid in your first month. Almost nobody pays the standard rate at a storage facility. You were offered a promotion, the first month for $1 or half off for $3, or a number on a board outside that was noticeably lower than the one on the website. Move-in specials are close to universal across the industry. That number was never the price. It was the cost of getting your things through the gate. Here is why the distinction matters. Once your possessions are inside that unit, the cost of leaving is not the difference in rent. It is a Saturday, a van, two people you have to ask for help, and the decision you have been avoiding about what to actually do with the sofa. The industry has a word for what that produces. They call it stickiness, and they measure it. So somewhere between 6 and 12 months in, a letter arrives. Your rate is going up, not enormously, perhaps 8%, perhaps 15%. Then another one, then another. Existing customers at the large operators routinely end up paying well above what somebody walking in off the street that same afternoon would be quoted for the identical unit next door. Read that again, because it inverts everything retail has ever taught you. In almost every other business, the long-standing customer is the valuable one and is treated accordingly. Here, the customer who has been there longest is the one whose price rises fastest, precisely because they have proven they will not leave. Loyalty is not being rewarded, it is being measured and then billed. And the reason it works is not that you accept it. Most people do not accept it. Most people read the letter, feel the specific annoyance of being quietly repriced, put it on the kitchen counter, and pay it. Because canceling requires emptying the unit, and emptying the unit requires the decision. The rate increase is not a price, it is a toll on indecision. Which brings us to the number the industry actually watches, and it is not occupancy. Ask a facility manager what matters, and occupancy is the number they will say out loud. Ask an analyst on an earnings call, and you will hear about something else. Length of stay, how long the average tenant remains. Because the economics of a single unit are dominated by one moment, and that moment is the turnover. When a tenant leaves, the unit has to be swept, the lock replaced, the listing refreshed, and a new tenant found and discounted in. Every month that room sits empty is a total loss on the room. So the cheapest tenant a facility will ever have is the one already inside it. And the profit on a unit compounds with every additional month it stays occupied by the same person. Now the gap. People rent storage with a time frame in their head, the renovation, the deployment, between houses. Ask a new customer how long they expect to need it, and you will hear 3 months, 6 months, until the spring. The average tenant stays for years, a meaningful share stay for more than a decade. The industry knows that gap exists. It builds around the outcome rather than the intention. In the same way a gym is built around the January sign-up who stops going in March and keeps paying until August. The difference is that the gym member can quit with an email. The storage tenant has to physically retrieve 200 cubic feet of their own history first, and a proportion of them never do, which is where the least understood part of this business begins. But before we get to that, there is a second bill, and almost nobody thinks of it as part of the price. Go back to the day you signed. Alongside the rent, there was an administration fee. There was a lock, which you had to buy from them, because their locks are the ones the gate system and the overlock procedure are built around. And there was a line about insurance. That last one is worth slowing down for. Most facilities require you to insure the contents of your unit. That requirement is reasonable on its face. The building is not liable for what happens to your belongings, the contract says so in several places, and somebody should be carrying that risk. What is less obvious is who ends up selling you the policy. You can bring your own cover, and a homeowner's or renter's policy will often extend to a storage unit. Very few people do. Most tick the box at the counter and take the plan the facility offers, which costs somewhere between $12 and $30 a month depending on the coverage level. Now look at that from the operator's side. They are not carrying the risk. They are placing it or reinsuring it through an arrangement they have set up for exactly this purpose and collecting a share of every premium. The claims on these plans are low, because storage units mostly sit undisturbed in a locked building for years and nothing happens to them. A revenue line with very little cost attached to it, sold to a captive audience at the moment they are least inclined to shop around. On a $160 unit, an extra $20 is 12% more revenue from the same room, and it did not require building anything. Then there are the late fees, and this is where the fee structure stops being incidental. Miss the payment date by a few days and a flat charge is added. Miss it by a few weeks and there is a lien preparation fee on top of that, and then a notice fee, and in some cases an advertising fee. Fall far enough behind and the fees on a modest unit can rival the rent itself, which produces a strange incentive that is worth stating plainly. The tenants who are struggling most, the ones closest to walking away, are the ones generating the highest revenue per unit right up until the moment they stop generating any at all. And what happens at that moment is the part almost everybody gets backwards. Stop paying, and the storage company does not send you to a collections agency. It does not report you to a credit bureau. It does not, in most cases, sue you at all. It has something better. It has your things, and in every state in America, there is a statute that lets it sell them. The mechanism is called a lien. Buried in the contract you signed on a tablet in the office in about 90 seconds is a clause stating that if you fall behind, the facility acquires a legal interest in the contents of the unit. After a set period of non-payment, the operator can cut the lock, inventory what is inside, advertise the sale, and auction the lot to the highest bidder. The timelines vary by state, and they vary more than people expect, which is worth a look if you rent one. Some states let this begin in as little as 30 days. Some require public notice in a newspaper. Some do not. You have seen the television version of what happens next. The crowd at the roller door, the tarpaulin, the bidding, the man who finds something extraordinary in the third box. It made storage auctions into entertainment, and it left almost everybody with a completely inverted picture of the business. Because here is what the operator actually wants, and it is the reverse of the show. A defaulted unit is a failure. The company has lost a paying tenant, absorbed months of unpaid rent, spent money on notices and advertising, and now has to sell a stranger's dining table for whatever it fetches, which is usually a few $100s at most. The proceeds go against the debt. Any surplus in most states legally belongs to the tenant. The auction is not the revenue. The auction is what happens when the revenue stops. Now, I am not going to hand you a simple villain here, because the honest version of this is more interesting than the angry one. Self-storage exists because of things that genuinely happen to people. Somebody dies and their house has to be emptied in a fortnight while the family is still in shock. A marriage ends and one person needs somewhere for half a household. Somebody is deployed. Somebody is between homes and the new lease starts 6 weeks after the old one ended. In those moments, a corrugated room with a padlock is not a trap. It is the only option that does not require making permanent decisions on the worst week of your life. The month-to-month term that lets the company reprice you also lets you leave anytime you want, which is more freedom than any other lease in real estate gives you. And the lien exists for a reason too. Without it, a facility that stopped being paid would be legally obliged to warehouse abandoned property indefinitely at its own expense, and every tenant still paying would be covering the cost of the ones who left. There is no version of this business that works without some mechanism for ending an abandoned tenancy. The problem is not that any of these pieces are unreasonable on its own. The problem is that all of them together describe a business whose ideal customer is a person in the middle of something difficult who then stops thinking about it, which is the part that made Wall Street pay attention. Because the largest storage operators in America are not storage companies in any sense you would recognize. They are real estate investment trusts, listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and the biggest of them is worth more than Ford. Look at what that structure sees when it looks at a building. It does not see rooms. It sees a portfolio of several thousand tiny leases with no single tenant large enough to matter, near zero staffing, minimal maintenance, and pricing that can be adjusted on any of them individually at almost any time. Rents that reset every month rather than every 5 years. Revenue that responds to inflation immediately instead of being locked in. That is why the sector consolidated. Independent operators, and there are still thousands of them, mostly do not raise rates as aggressively because the owner lives 20 minutes away and has to see their tenants in the supermarket. The trusts have no such constraint. They buy the independent, install the software, and the rates on existing tenants begin moving within the year. The building did not change. Nobody added a service. The floor is the same floor. What was bought was the list of people who had already stopped noticing. So that is the machine, and it is a quiet one. A cheap shed, almost no staff, no inventory, no risk on the goods, a price that starts below the real one and climbs once you can no longer easily leave, and a legal instrument at the end for the small number who disappear entirely. Underneath all of it sits the simplest fact in this whole video, which is that human beings are extremely bad at throwing things away and extremely good at postponing it. You did not rent a room, you rented time. Time in which you did not have to decide what your father's tools mean, or whether you are ever going to fix the bike, or which of 11 boxes contains anything you will ever want again. That is the product. It has no shelf life, it costs nothing to manufacture, and it renews automatically on the 1st of every month. The company is not waiting for you to default. It is not hoping to sell your dining table. It is quietly hoping you will keep not opening the door for as long as you possibly can. And most of us do. If you enjoyed pulling this one apart, a like and a subscribe helps more than you would think. And if you want to see the same recurring revenue logic hiding inside a completely different business, go watch our video on how car washes really make money. Different building, same powerful idea. Turn an occasional decision into a monthly payment, then make staying easier than leaving. See you in the next one.